відбувається в рамках фокус-теми Книжкового Арсеналу «Сусідство. Відкрите питання». Мене звати Володимир, я є кураторкою фокус-теми. І сьогодні наша розмова відбуватиметься англійською мовою. Для тих, хто хоче почуватися більш впевнено, ви можете взяти навушники біля колони, там їх є достатньо. Тому прошу зробити це зараз, хто потребує навушників. Дякую. And I want to say a few words about this program. The discussion will be a part of the Who's Europe project founded by the German Federal Foreign Office within the framework of the program Eastern Partnership. Thank you for support of this event. And I would like to introduce my guest today. This is Aґата Пизік. She is a journalist, writer, and author of the book Poor but Sexy: Cultural Clashes in Europe and East and West, and she is from Poland. Glad to introduce you Volodymyr Єрмоленко, philosopher, writer, and director of European Project, and director of Center for Eastern, European Project Interviews Ukraine, a journalist, and at Hrvatske UA. And Ґвендолін Сассе, professor in comparative politics, director of Center for East European and International Studies. Thanks for coming here. And the name of our event sounds like the puzzles of European landscapes. And that means that we can imagine our Europe not as a whole and as a unit, but as a lot of puzzles which we can observe, and they are very different. And we will try to discuss some questions connected with the new landscapes that acquire in nowadays, and what kind of changes happening in political context in our countries from the perspective of Ukraine, from the perspective of Poland and Germany. And my first question will be addressed to you all. We observed the reality after the refugee crisis in 2015, which influenced a lot of European countries. Even those who were not willing to take part in this discussion. I mean Poland, for example, and Hungary. I mean also a Brexit process, which is still going on. And at the same time, United Kingdom still takes part in UA elections now. And of course, we have to talk about populism, which is a new disease of all countries, not only European ones. So what is your vision of these political and cultural landscapes of Europe? Can you distinguish your most irritating or most harmful problems that have to be discussed?
Hello. It's really difficult to compete with all of this, but I'm going to try my best. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really great to be here. This is an amazing event. And unfortunately, the populisms you were mentioning aren't new at all, and this is the biggest problem, that actually what's going on right now has been cooking for the last 30 years or something, and pretty much the signs of what's happening right now have been seen in post-communist sort of Eastern Europe almost from the beginning. I'm sure that Ґвендолін can say a lot about post-unification Germany and how, I don't know, today's, let's say, far-right, etc., has emerged in, parts of Eastern Germany already, like, in the 90s, right? And tendencies towards that existed before. And, so I can't really identify with the narrative that everything was going on well, and suddenly something terrible happened, and here we are, No, unfortunately we have to take greater responsibility that we were just very carelessly sort of investing in this very empty and shallow vision of post-political capitalism, neoliberalism, and sort of believed, politics will cease to exist if we are going to obey capitalist rules enough. And you know, this is simply, as we can see, this is not going to happen. And you know, I mean, my perspective is as Polish as it is in a way British now, because I spent like a key years of my adulthood in London, and I moved back to Poland like a few months before Brexit, and I was thinking about coming back, and I would have never, I mean, foreseen what was happening in the last 3.5 years in the UK, but then I kind of blame myself for my political naivete, because what UKIP and you know, this kind of political tendencies existed in British society before, they really did. And Polish people and you know, Eastern Europeans, they merely sort of replaced, I don't know, Caribbeans and Asians and Africans who were, you know, suffering racism before. And now it seems, you know, the whole capitalist crisis took such, you know, great shapes. Really, people in Britain, some of them are really just so poor. I mean, some of the poorest areas of European Union exist in Britain, like in Wales, for instance, or in northern England. And yeah, people who just didn't have all they say, you know, this is how they're going to, this is how they decided to use their political voice. And 66% of people in Poland are declaring that they are going to stay at home on Sunday, on the European election. So yeah, you just have a, you know, huge indifference in the new EU countries that were supposed to be energized by the inclusion. And yeah, you have huge political crises in the advanced democracies that were supposed to be like the soil of the EU. So, I mean, I don't know, I mean, my vision is like pretty utopian. I mean, I am hoping that Theresa May, who resigned today, will, you know, this will drag the Tory party to an end. There will be a Labour government in the UK that will somehow maybe stop Brexit, or will just make it, you know, as pro-European friendly as possible, and we are going to still have a freedom of movement, and we are going to, thanks to the, I don't know, the wave of far-right that is winning, and it's probably going to win in Poland. I mean, fascists and far-right confederation have 10% support in Poland right now. 10%. This is what they are going to get in the European election on Sunday. So, yeah, well, I am only hoping that this will energize what has left of the left. You know, and we will have some kind of reaction towards this, because now we are living in the time of the very deeply seated right-wing reaction, and you know, there must be an end to it. Progressive politics is the only solution.
Thanks, Aґата. Ґвендолін, please.
Yes, I would agree with you, Aґata, that I think what seems like a change around 2015 or maybe a little earlier was longer in the making, and probably many people, probably including ourselves, in that didn't see it or didn't maybe want to see it. But I am a German national, but I only returned to Germany 3 years ago, and that was just when the first bigger wave of refugees arrived in Germany, and I couldn't believe my eyes when people in Munich were welcoming those refugees. So I thought, oh, something's changed in Germany in the time I've been away. I lived in the UK since the late 1990s. So I was surprised about that. I didn't expect that. I mean, Germany has had obviously immigration, and in particular people with a Turkish background, but that surprised me. But then again, it was a fairly quick shift, not of the whole of society, but from an almost an outburst of welcoming, and actually lots of local grassroots initiatives, some of which are still going to help. Nevertheless, it has had a political backlash as well, but it didn't start with that issue. It has, I think that's probably one of these jigsaw puzzles that you refer to. It has more specific causes in each country, but then the symptoms look rather similar. And in Germany it is also tied up with still with reunification and not having prioritized some issues politically in East Germany enough, and sort of disappointments, real or imagined, are projected onto something, and then another big event happens, like a large number of people arriving in a country that triggers something which is already there, but it's not the actual cause. When I think about my arrival in the UK as a student in the late 1990s, I was always surprised that people said in Europe when they meant where I came from, but they didn't seem to include the UK in that, and I was such a strange phrase, and that was way before Brexit, but that was in the perception. Yes, one was somehow part of the EU, but somehow a bigger cultural conception was of Europe is over there. It was partly tied to being an island, but also more than that. And so again, it doesn't really come as a complete surprise that when the question was put, that a lot of things came together, and there was an error, but there was a vote to exit. But again, those sentiments had been there, and then they also kind of were pooled or channeled through. Again, it's not the cause, but it became sort of the scapegoat for it all, a large new immigration against the backdrop of lots of immigration compared to Germany. So I always really valued when I arrived the diversity that the UK had come to terms with some problems of course still, but compared to where I came from, that was a very different way of handling diversity. And so I think when you ask also about personal moments, to me that was kind of a shock. I'm not somebody who thinks usually, also not academically, in a very linear way, but I had to realize that in that respect I thought, okay, it can take some societies forever to kind of come to terms with diversity, but I didn't really think that you can roll it back so quickly. And I think what we see now in the UK, and against the backdrop of having had an experience with diversity through migration, you see an extremely polarized society, and that also the pace with which that can happen surprised me. And I realized in my own thinking, I think I always thought of that in a more linear way, that it can be painfully slow, but I didn't really think it can roll back so quickly and really leave exposed and also deepen polarization in society. And maybe why I also really like the way that you chose this topic, neighborhood, and how we think about this in the European context, because I think it changes all the time, and sometimes there are certain periods when, at least from maybe the population's point of view, or the elite's point of view, or our global view, we seem to be sure what Europe is, or what the EU is, and I think currently what the West is, but currently we're not sure about any of those things. And in a way, it's probably the more honest way that we need to question this all the time. But in particular after the end of the Cold War, there was a period where things seemed clearer, and now it's clearly not the case. We don't even know what Europe means inside the EU anymore.
You are probably right about the fastening of the whole process which happening today in Europe and in different countries. And for example, a few years ago there was a research about which country is most friendly towards refugees, and there was Spain, and then it changed in a couple of years tremendously, and it means that something happened now. Well, do we have something in common with these problems?
Of course, I think we have a lot. Ukraine has ceased to be an exotic country. We have basically in the past 10 years, even before Euromaidan, I think we have the same trends as in Western or Central Europe. And I think it is a little bit misleading when we are thinking about what's happening in terms of populism, far right. For me, this is too general, too abstract things, too abstract names. I would try to re-describe it in a different way. My point is that if we look back to European intellectual history, to the French Revolution, we recognize three values: liberté, égalité, fraternité, which means liberty, equality, and freedom. And basically these three values produce three major ideologies. 19th, 20th century. Liberty produced liberalism, equality produced socialism, and brotherhood produced nationalism or patriotism. All of these values, if they go to the extremes, they produce very extreme forms and criminal forms. Nationalism produced Nazism, or fascism, socialism produced Stalinism. Liberalism, by the way, produced liberal racism in the late 19th century. The problem is that after the World War II, Europe basically was structured according to only two of these three values, liberty and equality. The major battle was between different forms of liberalism, which turned to be what we call conservatism in Britain, right? Economic liberalism. And egalitarianism, meaning social democracy, or Christian democracy on the left, etc. The value of brotherhood, which is basically another word for identity, disappeared. It disappeared from the Western Europe because basically people thought that, look, the identity thing is discredited because we know where identity politics leads. It leads to fascism and Nazis. And partially it was true. It was also much more in the Central and Eastern Europe, and even much more in the Soviet Union, where all these nationalist things were disregarded. Not only nationalism was persecuted, but any forms of any kind of identity was persecuted. We Ukrainians know it very much. A Ukrainian poet could have 20 years in the camps, in the gulags, for just publishing a verse in Ukrainian. And we had many stories like that. Soviet gulags were full of Ukrainians who were just saying that, look, your cosmopolitan vision is only another way of Russian nationalism. So now we are seeing the epoch of what Fukuyama is calling identity politics. We've seen, by the way, Francis Fukuyama a few days ago in Kiev. And Fukuyama is a very interesting guy because we just mentioned these kind of utopian, a little bit utopian, but I think it is a little bit utopian to consider Fukuyama utopian. His vision of the late 80s, the end of history and all this stuff, where he was basically proposing this history of 20th century as a kind of a very painful looking for balance between equality and liberty. And he was saying very right things, that equality and liberty are very good values, but they're difficult to harmonize. It's a very long process of trying to harmonize liberty and equality, and it's all what politics was about in the second half of 20th century in the Western world. But I told him on Wednesday, I don't know if he agreed or not, but that's my point, that he forgot brotherhood as a kind of another value, because people.
And sisterhood.
People not only want to be free, they not only want to be equal, they also want solidarity. They also want to be part of the group. And when, for example, the modern left or liberals are saying that, look, we are against identity politics because we are against these little solidarities, that's not true, because basically they also want to be part of certain groups. But their vision of certain groups is a little bit different than, for example, the vision of nations or whatever. So coming back to my point, I think we lost the feeling of the center. The key danger of today's politics is not a far-right, not only far-right populism, or far-left populism, or far-liberal populism, is a radicalism as such. any kind of radicalism which basically is saying, look, this is my value, freedom is the only value, and I don't care about all the rest. I think this is major danger. This is why we are polarizing. This is why, for example, we in Ukraine have increasingly difficult debates between people who are saying, well, we need to take care at least a bit about identity politics, and like very hardcore liberals who are saying, no, any kind of identity politics leads to fascism. Well, I think it doesn't if it's not radical. So my point is that the biggest task of the future is to try to refine balance between at least these three values, which are basically the origins of our modernity, political modernity, and trying to recenter politics away from these different three radicalism.
If you want to comment on this, please do.
I'm not sure if I understood that Fukuyama would be still supposed to be a most perfect commentator of Eastern Europe, or anything really. And I thought that recently he withdrawn basically from everything that he said like 30 years ago. No, he still stands by the end of history stuff. No. Seriously?
He switched to social media.
Okay. Good for him.
No, I can answer to this if you want. Or
Yeah, I mean, actually, because we have very little time, maybe we should leave the discussion for the end, because you had one more important question.
Okay, then you can discuss.
No, but let me respond, because it's important. I mean, I'm not a fan of Fukuyama, not a very big fan, but we should not simplify him. If you remember his essay, The End of History, the last basically phrase of his essay, that end of history will be too boring. It will be the end of politics, as you mentioned, and therefore it's utopia. History will start again. In this way he was right. When he was writing his End of History in 1998, his major concept was themos, which is a concept of dignity. His concept of the love against identity politics is themos, meaning dignity. I think the concept of dignity is one of the most important in political theory, and it's certainly very important for Ukrainians who are living 5 years after the revolution of dignity. So I think Fukuyama is wrong in many ways, but we should not simplify him, and I think he's still valid.
Thank you. And going further, talking about these values and identities, I would like to mention that this year we have 30 years anniversary of Berlin Wall fall, and it was a very important event for the whole Europe and the whole world actually. And my question is, I would not like to call it this way, learning something from history as a lesson, but these 30 years, have they passed unnoticed, or did we learn something from these events 30 years ago? Or because the context changing, but the problems are the same. We still have borders and borderlines. Yesterday we have a big discussion with a writer from Cyprus, and actually it going on, and the same problem exists, and not mentioning the situation in Ukraine with borders and all these political problems. So what should we learn from this, and how can we, what kind of perspective we have to have today to this anniversary, so to say?
So in my book, which I published already over 5 years ago, I was referring to probably way too often to that context, the post-communist context, the wall and everything, because I was feeling that the political difference has transformed into economical difference, that there was still the credit givers and credit takers, that there was the Mauer im Kopf, the wall in the hands, that there were still, economic differences that were sort of, describing the lives of people from the two sides of, now non-existent Berlin Wall. And do you know that around a year and a half ago, I mean, the period post-Mauer has been now longer than the time that the Mauer was actually standing. I think like a year ago it was like exactly 50-50, and now we are actually past that. So actually the post-communist period has been now going on for longer than the Berlin Wall. And I think that this is really the high time to stop describing ourselves as post-communist. I don't want to do that anymore. I think I was thinking whether I can, when I was in London, whether I can build some kind of neo-Eastern identity based on basically the feeling of disappointment of the 25 years after the end of communism. But everything what happened since sort of made me think that we have to come up with something else. And I am angered sort of to hear once again, despite we are in 2019, to hear that socialism would be, as an ideology or politics is supposed to be described by the fact that it produced Stalin. I mean, it's really kind of, I was hoping that we can sort of extract socialism from the sort of historical embrace of, I don't know, Soviet Union or, I don't know, DDR or anything that those sort of countries accomplished, and sort of, make something new out of it. I mean, I don't want this idea to be determined by the Cold War and by the post-war history. And of course, this is happening already, I don't know, in the United States, in what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is trying to do with Bernie Sanders, and it's happening in the countries of the former Yugoslavia, where people are trying to come up with the left that wouldn't be Yugo-nostalgic. And I'm hoping that the Central Eastern Europe, which has always been, I don't know, the most conservative, unfortunately, and also Russia, I'm hoping for the same for Russia too, is going to extract the idea of socialism or communism from the Cold War past, and it's going to make something else out of it. And of course, seeing that the pro-social party in Poland, has like 2% support, I know that this is not going to happen anytime soon, because people who are disenfranchised and impoverished, and they are not doing so well in the current capitalist system, decided to locate their hopes in the populist right-wing parties, mostly. And they are looking for these solutions, in this kind of political movements, and not within the left. And I guess, I don't know, I want my generation to sort of reclaim that idea. And I don't know if that means that we blend something or not. In everything I did as a political commentator, I wanted the West, so to speak, to recognize the historical and political position and uniqueness of the East, and it was kind of important for my identity. And I think that given that people in Eastern Europe still feel inferior to the West, and I don't want them to. I think that they should sort of try to reclaim something positive out of the Easternness, and not to focus so much on, I don't know, trying to copy, I don't know, Western capitalism, which is obviously now in a very deep crisis and is collapsing as we knew it before. Sufficient to look at the protests in France, at Brexit, and in Germany as well, and and to kind of try to define ourselves and our politics via something more than just doing a copy of the West, and come up with something that will be ours, and hopefully building up some kind of positive legacy of socialism.
Okay, that's why probably you work with magazines and media which elaborate this notion of New East. Yeah, I wanted to talk about this, but I'm afraid our meeting is too short to cover all these questions. And besides New East, there is a notion of countries in transition, and Ukraine sometimes is called this way. And maybe you have other variants how to call these post-Soviet territories. How can we identify ourselves after the Berlin Wall?
I'm afraid I don't have a good new term. I try and avoid terms like transition, also things like post-communist, post-Soviet. So I think I can think of a long list of things I'd like to avoid, and maybe it's more important for me as an outsider looking at this region to listen more to how people define themselves, and I think that varies, and that's not as part of this identity politics. I don't think there is only one identity, and it's defined differently in different parts, and then there are more exclusive ways of defining yourself and more inclusive ways inside a state unit and beyond that and below that. But I also think that 30 years after 89 makes us realize a few things. I think on the one hand, maybe for people living through change and quite dramatic change in many places, 30 years might feel like a long time. In historical terms, I think it probably also reminds us, in particular for the kind of processes you are describing, if you're building political systems, economic systems, but also states and nations within states or identities within them, that is historically speaking still not such a long process, and quite a lot and has happened in a very condensed period of time. I mean, processes which in parts of Western Europe took centuries are happening all at the same time in the last 30 years. I mean, of course, against the backdrop of, not starting from scratch, but the amount of at least attempted and sometimes also seen through change politically, economically, and in terms of state and nation building, that is quite extraordinary. And that had to create also conflicts and leave people behind and bring out things which are perhaps partly informed by the past. But I agree with you, and I think it's I'm also thinking about my own sort of discipline. If you think about the social sciences, often when there's something that people can't explain, you will find a reference to, okay, the rest is explained by socialist legacies or historical legacies. Can also be kind of periods before that, which is even, in a way, maybe even more strange, because it's very hard to, they don't just lie around and then they're meta again legacies, so they have to be activated, they have to be made relevant for somebody. So this is a deeply political process, otherwise this doesn't happen automatically, and you can use various periods, whereas various reference points, some resonate more than others. I mean, the interwar period is very important. That's also, if you think about it, for how long were countries in the interwar period in Central Eastern Europe really democratic, but it's a big reference point. So how does that compare to many more years of not having it? That's a political process of how that is framed and how that supposedly shapes something. But I think it's an important point you also mentioned at the beginning. I would echo that completely. I think it's time to end exotic notions of parts of Eastern Europe, of Ukraine, and also Poland. I think this still goes on, and now, living in the UK, I always thought Eastern Europe to everybody, Central Eastern Europe, however we want to call it now, seems so far away, although despite in particular Polish migration bringing it really kind of into the country, and nevertheless it seemed very far away. In Berlin, it's not where I'm based now, it's not far away, but still people speak as if it's really far away. So even still, I think people, when they hear this, talk about Poland, it's ridiculous if you think about geographical distance if nothing else, but it still seems like a very different world, I think, and that shows something that, yes, one wall came down and it opened up lots of things, in particular from people from this region, but it also created lots of new walls, or it didn't change some mental ones. And with the EU, it also increased or built new borders, and I suppose the Polish-Ukrainian one is that example. And now maybe with visa liberalization for Ukrainians, it's going against the trend to some extent again, but it only reaches a certain part of the population that can take part in this. So I think we should be more aware of this, sort of the fluidity of this. Somehow On the one hand, 30 years is a long time for individuals, not so much historically maybe, so unrealistic expectations how quickly some things can be built perhaps, but then also that some borders coming down means some go up somewhere else, and they're not always the geographical and political ones, but they of course, and we're in the country that has experienced this in a dramatic way, that also principles like territorial integrity seem to be up for grabs again in Europe. And I think as part of our, I understand part of our work in Berlin also as talking more about it. I don't get a sense that people vaguely know there's a war going on, but that is a war in Europe is, I think, not really, hasn't really arrived, and that is both with the annexation of Crimea and the war in the Donbass. Those are critical reminders, and I think probably more important even than 89 this year, remembering that if that is possible, and then I think that tells us a lot about what is still missing, and not in Ukraine but in Europe, as an understanding of what is and isn't possible as a state or democracy or a political entity today.
I really appreciate you mentioning these issues. It's very important for Ukrainians to hear that. On Vera's questions, what is the difference apart compared to Berlin Wall? I think, coming back to this ghost of Fukuyama, I think that's the major difference. Because at the year before the Berlin Wall, basically there was an understanding that there is no alternative to liberal democracy. And history, it's only a question of time. The final victory of liberal democracy is only a question of time. That's what Fukuyama believed. Now we see that this is wrong. That liberal democracy has, unfortunately, alternatives. It's a new authoritarianism. It's coming both outside of Europe and inside of the Western world. And therefore, the notion of transition no longer is valid. Because transition is when you replace politics with a question of time. Transition means that, well, there is a goal, you just go with it. You will be there, you will be at that point. All the rest depends on you and how quickly you move. So that is wrong right now. Because any of us, Poles, Germans, Ukrainians, are no longer moved with only one force, unfortunately. We are moved with several forces, and some of them are very black and dark, meaning the new authoritarianism, new conservatism, etc. So the key question, I think that today's world is best described, can be described, not best, but partially described, by the combination of Fukuyama and Huntington. Huntington, who is saying that, look, the world is not uniformal, but it is a clash. But Huntington was wrong because he was thinking that it's a clash of civilizations. It's a clash of something different. It's a clash of values, most probably. But it's a clash. So, in this way we are entering, of course we have entered much more into an antagonistic world in which there are no longer systems. The politics is about Machiavellianism, in which your enemy now will be your friend, next year you will be your enemy two years after. Everyone is waging wars against everyone, so this is extremely difficult situation. Therefore, it's very needed to remind again and again that there are values, that we're not exotic, that Poles are not exotic, that Eastern Europe is not exotic, that Ukraine is not exotic, etc. How we describe ourselves? Well, it's difficult. For me personally, you mentioned Eastern Partnership at the beginning. Eastern Partnership much better than post-communism. Why? Because Eastern Partnership does not include Russia. So for us it's like going a little bit away from it. But I think that generally the Ukrainian story also shows that European values or universal values are still enlarging. Even despite all this Europe fatigue, Brexit, if you take not institutionally, but if you take values, they're still enlarging. Ukraine is not the last point, because we have Armenia already. we will probably have, I don't know, other countries, and we will probably have Russia, because we see that some parts of Russian citizens, younger ones, that do not feel comfortable with Putin. So in this case, okay, we are very skeptical, and there is a big difference of this backlash. But if we think in terms of like longer periods, maybe these value transformations will show us that the picture is better than we thought. About socialism and post-communism, I totally agree that we lack socialism today, the good socialism. Why? Because we face inequality. And this is basically the result of the 30 years of neoliberalism from Thatcher, Reagan, and Mitterrand, and which led to huge inequality. And this is something, if you take these values back, which I mentioned at the beginning, liberty, equality, and brotherhood, interestingly enough, we have domination of liberty, but we have very big problems with equality and brotherhood. And the reaction, today's reaction of so-called populism, is reaction to these two things. People feel themselves not dignified in their identity, and people feel themselves not dignified in their socio-economic standing, because they understand that there are 1% of rich guys who own everything. So in this case, yes, but socialism is important again. When socialism turns, socialism by no means leads to Stalinism. There is so much good socialism in the history of ideas, starting from early socialisms of, I don't know, Saint-Simon, Owen, and all the rest. But it leads to Stalinism when it says equality is the only value, let's forget about freedom and identity or brotherhood. In this way, it leads to catastrophe. Why, for Ukraine, the communist thing is still important? Because we are now living in this epoch of decommunization. It's a very ambiguous thing, criticized both in Ukraine and in the West. Many details which should be discussed, many things which I personally do not agree about. We should understand that there is an alternative to the East, and this alternative is called recommunization. If you take the Russia's narratives, like the past 2-3 years, you see from the Russian television that they're increasingly moving from the imperial identity, the Tsarist identity, even religious identity, to the communist identity. They're reviving basically the Soviet Union. And in this sense, the decommunization is also a fight for values. Because I have nothing against good moderate socialism, but I have a lot of against this revival of the former communist empire.
Thank you, Volodymyr, for your comments and all our participants. And unfortunately, the format of this meeting is too short, but I hope we all gave us some bullet points, some questions to think about and to discuss later, maybe, because this question will raise again and again. We will have to face it and we have to discuss more. So thank you so much for participating in this, and thank you for your attention.